All right. I've got Nick Soman on the podcast. Nick and I grew up in the entrepreneurial scene of Seattle, and I've been watching your career with great admiration. And I know I've learned a lot from our conversations. But, why don't you give an introduction to yourself, Nick? And I apologize, I butchered your last name. It's Soman officially,
It's
right?
okay. It's okay. Soman. People sometimes it's just Soman. What's going on? People
That's
remember
right.
it that way. Yeah, I'm Nick, and I've known Tom for a while. My non-work roles include dad and father of two young boys, and I'm also one of the co-founders, and I'm the CEO of Decent. But when I met Tom, was much earlier on. In my backstory, I'm the only one in my family who's not a primary care doctor. And so I'm glad you've looked on my career with admiration because that means someone has, Tom. Uh, I instead decided to go and start companies and started a company in Seattle where I got to know Tom, that I was able to honestly do some growth hacking and figure out how to scale to a couple million users. We ended up selling that to Napster, which was at that time located up in Seattle. Came down and built the growth team at Gusto, and then left Gusto to create this company, Decent. And I live in Mill Valley, California. Most of our business is out in Texas. When I'm not at work, I sometimes perform weddings as a minister for the non-denominational Universal Life Church, and that's a real gift and joy to be able to kind of bring friends together in that way. And other than that, I got a dog and a couple cats, and trying to work out on the Peloton every morning and figure it all out.
Right on. It is amazing just hearing those names like Napster. It just brings back memories of all like people there. We're old enough now where people do not know some of these names, even though we grew up with them.
They
Um,
don't, they don't, and
yeah.
they certainly don't think that they are cool.
No, they definitely do not. They definitely do not. Well, tell me, Nick, about how you got into product in the first place. Like, what did you start out in it, or how did you get there?
Yeah, it's a really good question and sort of an interesting question. Uh, because I didn't start out there, but the truth, Tom, is that I really didn't start out anywhere. I knew that I wasn't going to be a doctor. That's what it came down to, and that comes back to childhood. And I won't try to make this about Decent, but it's a little bit about Decent. I, I grew up with parents that mostly would talk at the dinner table on Bainbridge Island, outside of
Mm.
Seattle, about compassionate patient care. And then the second most popular topic was how the big insurance companies were ruining compassionate patient care. So I got to hear about that a lot growing up. I got to hear about how this is the worst time to become a primary care doctor in the last 50 years.
Mm.
And I listened. And frequently I'd be like, no more doctor talk at the table because it just got insufferable. But I ultimately did decide to go a different direction. I didn't know what that would be. And I did a plethora of super weird jobs. Just to give you a sort of an embarrassing story, I was an English major at Stanford because I didn't realize college was fundamentally about getting a job. I thought it was about doing cool things and reading cool books. I was wrong. Any English majors, you still have time to change. And I graduated into a little bit of a recession, and I was trying to figure out what the hell am I going to do for work. And I didn't have a lot of great ideas, but there was a guy called Lenny Lieberman who is known to sort of be the king of infomercials. He's behind infomercials like Proactive Acne Solutions that you may have seen on late night
Oh, I,
TV.
I once or twice I've seen those ads. Yes.
And if I'm being extremely real, I was like, this guy's Jewish. I'm Jewish. He sounds kind of cool from what I've read about him. And I walked into his office and I said, I need you to give me a job. I said, I don't know what I'm doing with myself. I need to give me a job. And if you don't give me a job, I might go to law school. And I think we can both agree that would be a terrible outcome. And he said, who the hell are you? And then we talked for a while, and he did give me a job. He actually gave me probably the most interesting job I've ever had. It was my job to take a video camera and walk around the Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco and ask people about their acne issues.
Okay.
And this is why that was an interesting job. It was because of a really hard job. It was
Yeah.
a little bit of a opportunity to try selling something no one wanted, which is the founder
Yes.
journey for most
I
folks
was gonna
for
say
several
you're like a
years.
startup founder.
Totally like a startup founder. And I was like, how am I going to do this? I don't know how I'm going to do this. I ended up solving the
Yeah.
problem a little bit. There were these stoners that were sitting up on Hippie Hill in the Haight Ashbury, and every day they would sit down, they have a little circle, and they'd smoke joints. and they weren't going anywhere. And so I'd walk up and I'd just sit down and talk to them about their acne issues. And we got to know each other a little bit. So I'd come over and they'd say, "Hey, it's Proactive Man." And yeah, that's how I got paid for that first year. And I got interested in that, but I ended up kind of stumbling into consulting. I really wanted to do a good job. I was very bad at it to start, but then I kind of learned on the job, and I was so thankful that somebody had given me something that my parents would look at as a real job that I stayed for 5 years and I got pretty good at it. And that was sort of healthcare focused, but not entirely. But I was so jealous, man, of my friends that were working in product. I was really jealous of my friends that were starting companies because even then that was starting to happen. And I didn't know how to get from where I was, which was at that point a pretty high performing consultant, to operating product and ultimately starting companies. And I think I kind of knew that I wanted to do that. Ended up going to our shared alma mater, little school in Harvard Business School. And Harvard for me was the exit from the consulting path. And so I was lucky. I found a chance to come work at Amazon for a summer, actually on their self-published books platform, CreateSpace, which I found fascinating. And it was like, okay, I want to solve problems for people. I'm a pretty good writer, so I can start to write these requirements. And these are some really unique people. The self-publishing space, full of some weirdos, full of some wonderful, thoughtful people that want to be, the master and mistress of their destiny. I thought it was super cool. But my whole intention was to end up in the Bay Area and start companies. And so, long story short, I go back to business school, and in my second year, I got a paralytic illness called Guillain-Barré syndrome that strips the protein sheaths from around your nerves so they can't take signals from your brain. So you can't walk, you can't move. You're kind of laying there like, and thinking a lot. And that's what you do when you're sick. And I realized that it was time. I'd done consulting for 5 years. I was like, I want to get into product. I want to start companies ultimately, but I couldn't walk. And so Amazon called, and it was funny. I don't think they think I was great shakes at product. And I'll be honest, on your PM podcast, I don't think I'm great shakes at product. So they called me and they said, "We like you, pretty smart guy. We want to put you on supply chain." And at this time I was paralyzed, and I was like sad. I didn't want to work in supply chain. Not there's anything wrong with it, but it wasn't interesting to me. And I realized I had a little tiny bit of leverage. So I'm talking to this poor recruiter. And I was like, "I don't want to work on supply chain. I want to work on Kindle." And you heard just like papers rustling and just uncomfortable silence on the other end. And finally, they called me back twice. They offered me 2 other jobs, and they're like, "Fine, you can come work on Kindle." And I'm thankful for that. And I honestly don't know if it had anything to do with the fact that I was paralyzed. And I'll always be thankful to Amazon for bringing me back to do that. I came and worked for a year, and then I literally was sitting down as a product manager on the Kindle. My job was to put page numbers in Kindle books, which is sort of an interesting but weird job. And I was right across the street from the Techstars office, and I just sat down on my first day and looked over there and said, "What's that logo? Oh, what's that company?" And that kind of brought me to the entrepreneurship world that I'm in now.
What a cool story. Now, I do want to clarify, you made a joke about being an English major, and it's not too late to change. As a small liberal arts college grad, that's very hurtful to hear, because we convince ourselves that no, you can study biology or philosophy or economics or any of the liberal arts, and you're learning how to learn, you're learning how to think constructively and critically, and then just go and do great things in the world later. Do you feel like that's kind of an older way of thinking? Like, how do you feel about what people study in college?
It's a really good question. If I'm answering it very honestly, I would say you can do that. And you and I, aka Survivorship Bias 101, have had some success doing that. You should understand that if you have a mom and a dad who love you, but are evaluating how you're doing on the basis of the job that you get out of college and how long it takes you to get that job, it's not that you won't be able to do it. You might win the lottery, but you're going to be on a little bit of a higher degree of difficulty. So what I would say is, you better like philosophy. If you really want to study that stuff, you want to read books that are about crazy stuff, from the 1800s, you better like those books. And if you do like those books, then Godspeed.
Got you. The pragmatist in you. I appreciate that.
I got kids, man. I don't get to be as idealistic as we'd all like to be. But I'll turn that question around on you. I do believe in the ability of learning to learn, et cetera. I think I'm being mildly facetious, but I also think I really like what I do. and it seems like you like what you do. And if I'm honest, there were probably faster ways in, and that's okay that I didn't take them, but I believe that they exist.
Yeah, I mean, I think the liberal arts are like one of those things where right out of college, they may not be the fastest route to opportunity, but if you take the long view and you're willing to take a risk that you'll have maybe a slower start, I feel like, having a really broad exposure to different academic disciplines in college really did help me kind of expand how I think about things and how I communicate and write and participate in seminar discussions and all those good things that you had in the liberal arts. And so it's sort of like, the MBA, people make that argument like, well, an MBA in general management like may not be as helpful as even a bachelor's in computer science. But that MBA, I don't know, I feel like it comes in handy. What do you think?
Oh, I sure think that it
Yeah.
does, but for me, that's about the network. And I guess I'll probably just be an equal opportunity joker. I'd probably put a Stanford English major above a Harvard Business School, business degree in terms of practical utility outside of the network. But there's a tremendous value in that network, and then there's aspects of pedigree of okay, this
Mhm.
is a little bit of a feeder for different
Mhm.
jobs we want. I guess I want to ask you a question because I know my experience has
Yeah,
been that
go for it.
what you said is right. There's a lot of value in cross discipline thinking. The thing that I can point to most is that I'm a pretty good storyteller now, especially
Mhm.
related to work and missions that I'm on. And I wasn't as good of one, even when I was, younger. And I think some
Mhm.
of that honestly was creative writing. Some of that was
Mhm.
I taught public speaking at Stanford and figured out how to kind of make an argument.
Mhm.
I think that is intensely valuable. And I'm curious about in your role, because you work, very successfully at a
Mhm.
larger tech company. I can connect decent ongoing survival, and we're about 4 years in. Raised about 40 million bucks. A lot of it is storytelling because we're in that early
Yeah.
stage. We're building something great. Is that true at Google too?
Yeah, I think so. In fact, we had I just interviewed Manuel Bronstein, who was a former Googler, now CPO at Roblox, and
Wow.
storytelling. Yeah, he was. I think he listed storytelling as at least one of the top two things that a PM needs to be able to do well. And I do think you learn that well in lots of environments. I think for sure undergrad, but I would say also I agree the HBS network is good, but I have drunk the Kool-Aid on the case method, and I do feel like
Hmm.
those 80-minute discussions when you're trying to defend your position or you're trying to make a
Hmm.
case, and you have to do it in a very brief period of time, and you got to think on your feet. Like I think that is helpful. The one asterisk I would make about the liberal arts that both of us benefit from, so this is you're the English major, I was a history major, is that I mean, you were at Stanford, so it's like it almost doesn't matter what you majored in. Like there's instant some base level of credibility. I went to a small liberal arts college in New England, but it's kind of plugged into like the establishment. Now, if you said for our kids, if they were going to go to like some very good but sort of very typical university, nothing
Yeah.
like sort of like
Yeah.
extremely selective, and then they said they want to major in history and English, I would be like, bro.
Yeah.
So I
You're
think
like
that,
you're gonna be paying for your college, but I support you.
yeah, like it's like that's not going to work out, man, because if I want to hire an English major, like there's a bunch of them at Stanford or Yale or Princeton or whatever. So I think that is an important call out. Like you can, I think you can go broader and more intellectually kind of uh, take a more less pragmatic approach, but then you'd have to do it at the highest levels.
I think that's actually a really good distinction, and I agree.
Mm. So you go to Amazon and strategically places the Techstars office right outside the Amazon, windows.
Yep.
But Amazon's a pretty famous place, and I'm
Hmm.
curious, like, did any of those famous Amazon values, did you bring them any of them with you to this day, or do you feel like, it works for Amazon? It's a
Oh
different
no,
environment.
I loved so much about Amazon, man. I really did bring things forward because I didn't know anything about product management when I got to Amazon. And so a tremendous amount of what they do well were things that I tried very hard to
Mm,
absorb. I'll give you a couple examples of their leadership principles. Customer obsession, super, super real. And disagree and commit, extremely
mm,
real. Those are things that I think are so, so important. There was one reason that I didn't fit in Amazon, which is that I'll say this metaphorically, but it's also true. I need to work with people I need to get a hug from once a month. It doesn't need to be every day. I'm not super soft, but
mhm.
I need there to be an emotional attachment to my work and by proxy and to some degree to my colleagues. Because if I'm working hard on something, I feel the highs and lows.
Yeah.
And I think that was different from the archetype that I saw being super successful at Amazon. And I did a pretty good job there. Nobody was mad with my performance, but I
Mhm.
realized I needed something a little bit. I wanted to bring more of my full self to work, warts and all. And I think this is
Mhm.
something that I think about at Decent a lot. And there are many times when I've failed this test, many times that I'm really trying to do a better job of it. If a company could be as obsessed about getting its internal culture right and its culture for its team right as it is about customer obsession, I actually think those two things can exist on an equal footing. And I have not delivered that yet at Decent, but it's something that I very much like to. I think if there's a knock on Amazon, I always felt like they care so much about the customer, and that's
Mm.
such a wonderful thing. But sometimes the team gets kind of ground under the heel of that need, and I suppose that's just a spectrum, but I probably would lean a little bit more towards equanimity in that spectrum.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's part of the charm of that place in that it really is obsessed about the customer. And I have a good friend of mine who's still at Amazon after like over a decade now. And whenever he whenever we talk about company benefits, like Google and Amazon, they have a different approach to that.
Yes, they do.
And he's always like, "Oh, well, by you getting that literally, I got a snack box in the mail, like all these like really delicious kind of gourmet snacks and everything."
But
And
before you go into what your friend said, sounds pretty nice, doesn't it? Anyone who's listening, objectively kind of positive, sounds kind of good. All right, watch what Amazon does to this.
yeah, well, he was saying, well, because of the company spending money on those snack boxes, like you're not able to offer your customers things at a lower price, or that could be, that could have been passed on to the customer. And I guess, I think the alternate view is like, well, if you invest in a great employee experience, you can attract and retain really capable people who then can do amazing things for the customers. And it's not this margin like, oh, let's shave zero point 0.1 cents off the delivery charge. It's more like, let's build, Google Photos or something, like, and they're kind of big deals.
I think what's amazing to connect two things we're talking about. What we're really talking about is storytelling around an operating model. And I think
Hmm.
that's really fascinating because these are just two operating models. One is not necessarily better than the other.
Yeah, yeah.
One could make an argument that the thing that will determine, that will be the arbiter of which is better, is in fact which can tell the more compelling story. And you were sitting there minding your own business and eating your delicious gourmet snacks, and Amazon orthodoxy came along and said, "Oh, that could be, passed on to the customer." Well, guess what? There's some people that need an arm transplant, Tom, but I'm keeping these babies.
Yeah. Yeah,
and,
yeah, 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 yeah.
and I think I think the company's done an incredible job at times to an extreme in focusing on that customer obsession. There's so much to learn about being so singularly focused on one thing. I just think that what I am seeing as the world changes is that there's more of an expectation that the care that we give to the people we serve can be more inclusive of the people that we work with.
Yeah, I for sure agree with that. And um, I will also say, as an Amazon customer, I love how obsessed they are
Oh
about
yeah.
us,
Oh yeah.
and I
Yeah.
benefit from it all the time. So I have immense respect for this little. I mean, we were in Seattle when
Yeah.
that was just sort of like this. cool little online bookseller, and nobody would have said they would be comparable in influence on the technology industry to a Microsoft, and they certainly are now. So, kudos to them. I mean, I love whenever we interview people from Amazon, I'm always like, well, I know this person can work their tail off and deliver and
Oh
is
yeah.
dependable, and they're just battle hardened, So
All of that
definitely.
is so real, man. And I'm look, when I have the opportunity to talk to people who have worked at Amazon, who work at Amazon, I would take that interview 10 times out of 10. I think the disparaging way to say that is it's a great place to be from. I don't quite think that's right. I don't think that's fair to the
Mhm.
great things they do. It just becomes a fake question about, what it is you're looking for and which store you can buy into.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, I'll tell you, and this was ultimately a thing that led me to be a founder. I was I was putting page numbers in books. And I think for the sake of not violating any Amazon confidentiality, I
Mm.
won't give any detail, but I will say it was difficult because there'd been some engineers that had created this incredible tool. Amazon engineering
Mm.
is absolutely amazing that could do most of my job for me for about 95% of books. But there were some really weird books. And I remember Jay-Z had put out his book, and it was basically a photo novel, really interesting book. But this OCR scanner that some of the devs had built literally,
Mhm.
on break wasn't able to handle his book. So what I remember, and there might be a little hyperbole here, I was an English major, but I don't think much. I think it was pretty much Christmas Eve, and I'm sitting at 9 o'clock in the Amazon office, and I was flipping the pages in Jay-Z's book, and I was like, the last word on page 17 is hustler. The last word on page 18 is killer. And I just thought I can't be here right now. I gotta get out of here. And I went home and I talked to my wife, and I was kind of waffling because Amazon is an incredible place.
Mhm.
And she said, "Look, this is why I think you got to leave, because on your best days you're maybe writing a footnote in the Jeff Bezos story,
Mm.
and you could rightly point out there's hubris in that, there's ego in that, all that stuff is real." But ultimately, I was like, okay, I need to go see what it would be like to do this on my own, and I did.
Or at least get some snacks.
Or get some snacks. If I could get some snacks, I'd probably still be at Amazon, Tom.
It's all about the snacks.
It's often about the snacks.
So tell me, Nick, like you said, oh, hey, I'm not that good at product. But you've started multiple companies and you've built many, many products that have gotten a lot of scale and success. So what do you mean when you say you don't think you're at least great at product, or how, what's your view on what product does that even?
Oh, that's such a good question. Let me give you a non-hand wavy answer. People who are really, really great at product are really good at intuiting and pulling out information about what can be built to truly be of service to a large number of other people. And anything related to human beings is far, far more nuanced than you expect at first blush. And so, what I've
Mm.
observed in really great product people, they tend to be sort of a combination of psychologist and detective. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. These are people that sort of understand human beings, and they're really interested in what makes people tick. They can think deeply about uh, how people live on a day-to-day basis and the problems that they're facing and the things that they might want. And then, because that's not complete to deliver a great set of requirements, you kind of have to become a detective to better understand needs, to better
Mhm.
understand what's possible. I'm a really good detective, but I'm not a really good psychologist. That's the truth. That's what it comes down to. Is
Mm.
I can be a really good founder because, and I learned this the second time around with Decent. I picked a problem that's so in your face painful, affordable health insurance in
Yeah.
America,
Yeah.
that there's no adoption risk. If we can do what we think we can do and what we've started to do, people are going to buy it. And we're starting to see that. There's a tremendous amount of technical risk. There's a bunch of regulatory risk. There's,
Mhm.
can you deliver on this thing? But in some ways, Decent was born out of my own shortcomings because I learned, having worked in the world of social, where whether your thing takes off or not may be the growth channel you choose. It may be
Mhm.
whether, I'm not going to say it's if the button is red or blue, but it sometimes feels like it's if the button is red or blue. I'm not a good enough psychologist to intuit what's going to work in that world. And
Mm.
so, to me, even though it's not, I have friends like Paul Davison who have been studying this for a long time and are deeply thoughtful about it, it feels more like trying to catch lightning in a bottle. At Decent, I can go full detective because I'm like, this shit's so broken that, if we can do it at all, then people are going to want it. And I think there's a difference between great at product and great at starting a company. And this is where it's a different kind of storytelling. I've always been pretty comfortable on my feet. I've always been very comfortable sort of trying to connect people to this big, hard thing that needs doing. But those are different from product skills. And I wouldn't say I'm terrible, but I work best in product when there's a really clear goal. Like I could do growth. I did growth and led the growth team at Gusto because I knew that my goal was to make a number go up and to the right. And there were a limited number of levers to do that. I can do Decent because there's no fundamental question about what we're building, something people want. It's can we build it? The great product people can divine sort of what is desired out of the mess of humanity, and I can't do that.
So when you are hiring product people, how do you find people that have that capability that you're looking for to complement you? Like, how do you evaluate them?
To be really honest with you, I get people who are better at product than me to talk to them, even when people are outside the company, sometimes people that are inside the company, because I'm really good at understanding people's motivations. I'm really good at understanding whether how they prefer to look at managing a team fits with what we're trying to build at Decent and sort of mission alignment. But there's a big gap in my literally this is true. There's a big gap sometimes in my review sheets when we interview people about product skills, because I sort of know what I'm talking about, but not as much as anyone we might want to hire to do a senior job. And so the only fix that I've found, well, trying to get a little better at it myself, is to connect them with people. And thankfully we've got even some more junior people on my team who are exceptional in terms of product skill. I can't be the one that's evaluating that.
Wow. That's pretty self-aware of you. That's great. Tell me a time where you were in a meeting or you're working on something and one of your product folks, either at Decent or any of the previous companies, really brought that magic, and you were like, oh yeah, that's good that we got that person there.
Yeah. I have a very recent example.
Yeah.
And this is probably stuff that as I mature as a CEO, I'll stop talking about, internal Decent stuff that's going on. But I was having a conversation about what we're fundamentally building at Decent. And to give you a little color, we have these comprehensive health plans that cost 40% less than when you buy them elsewhere. They're ACA compliant, which means they cover everything, and the Democrats and the Republicans aren't going to yell too much about them. And they have a net promoter score of 79 versus an industry average of 19. So that's all of the good things about Decent in like 2 sentences. Plus, we have a really good team. But it's a good starting point. And so I went, shit, like where do you go from there? That feels pretty good. And I had a bunch of conversations with people on my team, including product people on my team. And one thing, I feel like I ragged on Amazon, so I'll give them some love. It's hard to be a product person at Amazon without some sense of the business. And I think that's great. I do have a pretty good sense of business. And so it was very helpful for me because I was always thinking about what are we trying to achieve here? And the product people at Decent are cut from that same cloth. We started looking at the economics of a health plan. And it turns out, this is wild, that some of what's so broken right now is that if I need an MRI, then I might go to one place that's going to charge me $500. I might go to another place 2 blocks away that's going to charge me $2,500. The price is a mess. It's absolutely nuts. And so if you solve that problem, a really interesting thing happens. If you can find a way, and we have found a way, to make sure you're getting that MRI for $500 instead of $2,500, to make sure that you're getting that nutrition counseling for $50 an hour in some cases instead of $250 an hour, you start to see the real cost of things. And then you can go, okay, it sure looks like we could give some of this stuff away for free if we believed that we were going to keep people on these plans for 5 years. Then it sure looks like the impact of giving some of this stuff away for free with moderate utilization could pay for itself. And there was some people with real product bent on the team that are going, rather than looking at new features that, as you and I know, make things complicated rather than simple,
Mm-hmm.
rather than launching something that is materially different, what if we just started really doing the math, like as hard as we can, and make some bets on what else can we give Tom, the already happy, decent member, as part of his coverage that ultimately pays for itself? And you know what my analogy was that I tried to explain this to the team? It was Amazon Prime, Tom. It
Mm.
was, what if we could give people more things that when you look at the math, it actually pays off? And I think I was the one that was able to find that analogy. I wasn't the one that had the insight of maybe instead of trying to do different things with our product, we could just try to triple down on what it can already do. And I get fired up. I'll tell you some of where we hope to go as a company. You start thinking about that and you go, oh, if you believe that a lot of this is predicated on if you can keep people around. One of the
Mm-hmm.
problems with American healthcare now, as you know, is if people are going to change jobs every 2 years and they have one insurance company for the first job and a totally different one for the second job, that payoff horizon is so
Yeah.
short that it limits what can be done. But if you could keep people for 5 years, if you could keep people for 10 years, if you could effing crack portable benefits, Tom, all of a sudden maybe we do what certain European countries do. We take the insurance card, it becomes a credit card. Why shouldn't it be a credit card? Then, because it's a credit card, it gets you discounts on food at your local farmer's market. It gets you discounts on various healthy choices that you can make
Mm-hmm.
that, with the appropriate time horizon and utilization, can pay off. And I know I'm nerding out, but like I got super excited about that because it solved two problems. One, I thought this is going to be good for our business, and two, this is going to be good for our customer without adding any incremental complexity. And that's what I'm looking for.
Yeah, that sounds like there was a magical moment where you were unpacking the math of, hey, there's this huge disparity in costs for things depending on what people use, and then a couple of leaps later, it's like, okay, but what can we do with what we currently offer and
Yeah.
make that available for free?
And
Uh,
you know how it goes.
yeah,
It's when you solve one problem, yes, there's always another one waiting, but often you get to revisit your assumptions about,
yeah, yeah.
okay, if it wasn't true that price was a complete beast and there was some predictability, like what would follow from that? And this is why I say that I'm a good detective. Like I think about this stuff obsessively. I'm not brilliant, but I'm smart enough, and I can figure out like what are the second and third order effects. And it gets super exciting when you start to see a positive one because healthcare is so full of negative ones.
Hmm. Indeed. Tell me a little bit about how your approach to picking has your approach to hiring product people changed over the years, or has it been pretty consistent?
No, it really has changed because my ego needed to be subjugated a little bit for me to do it this way. Um, I'll tell a story that you know well.
Hmm.
I mean, man, like when I met you, I had built Tinder. Sounds good, right? For your desktop computer. Totally didn't see mobile coming. Totally didn't think about the
Mm,
value of geographic proximity. And that was my product failing. And you look at that thing and you go, oh, it's ugly. It's terrible. Who is building this? Turns out to be an egocentric CEO who wants to be a product person and isn't. And I didn't have the self awareness at that time to kind of just go, I'm going to bring somebody in who is, and
mm,
they're gonna do this part. Partly, and I bet you'll relate to this, because I thought, what is there for a CEO to do besides product? Like
mm,
as silly as that sounds, I think eventually everybody discovers this thing that apocryphally Fred Wilson's friend said about hire and retain great people, keep money in the bank, and tell the story.
mm,
But when you're a first time CEO and you're surrounded by people that can actually do things, you know, your co founder can code and you hired this woman who can design and she's really good at it. And you're sitting
mhm,
there and you're like, storytelling, fundraising, don't know how to do it. That seems scary. And maybe someday I'll learn. And then, you know, hiring, like, is that a real job for me? Or is that just me? Is that more storytelling? It took me a long time to realize two things. One, I just wasn't good. It wasn't good enough to build a
mhm.
world class product. And two, there certainly is enough in those other three buckets that it merits a full-time job and sometimes more than that. And that took some time to figure out.
It reminds me, I had Keela Robinson, who is a VP at Netflix, on the show a couple weeks ago. And it does seem like as you move up in the product management ladder at big companies, you're not really working on product the way you were, when you were earlier in your career either. And you end up in the phrase that she used. I think this is one of those Netflix things was, context, not control, and that your job is to try and set context and hire amazingly talented and retain amazingly talented people, and help them figure out the right way without you directing them for the most part. And that does require a, to your point, a good dose of humility, because you basically have to say, hey, this collective team is going to do more than I can do myself. And all throughout our early career, we were rewarded for being the one with the answers and, following through and all that stuff. And it is a transition from, person who makes it happen to person who enables people who make it happen. Was that hard for you?
It was, and I'm happy to talk about me. And yes, it was very hard. I want to bring it back to you a little bit. I don't say this with any bad feelings. I think you're better at product than me, but I remember you being a gifted CEO. I remember you aligning a team around you. I remember you selling a vision that was, bigger than the sum of its parts today. And I'm looking at how Google must have felt when they had the chance to kind of bring you in and get some experience. Now, as you and I both know, there's a risk in bringing in founders to a larger organization. And I think a tremendous amount of it has to do with how humble can they be? How much is that ego, which unfortunately is the thing that leads so many people to starting companies in the first place. It wasn't the only reason, but it was certainly a piece for me of why I did this. And then you get all these skills that hypothetically are very useful in a product realm at a larger organization. But I can see why Google found a winner in you, because even when we were both early CEOs, I remember that I had the feeling you weren't really making it about yourself. And that's a wonderful balance. I think that this is probably why people call the PM, the CEO of the product. It's not entirely true, but there's some truth to it.
Yeah, it definitely. I mean, it's so amazing how much we've learned over the years, and it's also interesting that going from startup founder back to big tech for me was not an easy transition, because you just have to relearn a culture. And in theory, it's like, well, but you used to work at Google and then you came back. But it's still like you're operating at a different level. I was gone for like 7 years, and your the muscles that you used as a startup founder are useful, but not nearly like they have to be tuned. And I remember like my first exec review, and I was kind of in startup founder mode, and I think my manager had to say, like, you are trying to sell these people a little hard.
I can relate.
And he's like, you don't need to raise money from them anymore. Like, you're funded, like you don't need to raise another round. Like, you need to be really good at different things, like explaining the risks and the mitigations and the status, and raising the open questions. Like, so it's very different than a board conversation might be, at least as
I
an
want to
early
ask you a
stage stuff.
follow-up on that, Tom. If you decided tomorrow, and I don't understand that there's a plan to do this, but if you decided tomorrow to start another company, do you think you would how would you approach it differently based on the time that you've spent at Google this run through?
Ooh. Okay, first of all, I'm pretty sure my wife would kill me if I told her I wanted to start another company.
So you approach it by dying in your first
day. Yeah, that's right.
Great.
So assuming
fail fast, Tom. I like it.
Yeah. Assuming that I like avoided, Matrix style, all the flying sort of utensils across the room.
Amazing.
What would I do different? I think for one thing, I always knew that, an early manager once said to me, like, none of us is smarter than all of us.
Yeah.
And I always believed it, but I'll be honest, I also thought that I was pretty, like, maybe the first in my class kind of feeling, right? And now I'm very okay. I'm like, I prefer to work with people who are like way better at me at a variety of things. And and I think I knew that intellectually in the past, but I never embraced it as much as I do now. And I think part of that is like you we are probably more confident about our capabilities now than we were as first time founders. And so there was I imagine I may not have as much of an imposter syndrome as I might have had in 2006 or whatever, or 2009. Um and then the second thing is I would absolutely, to your point, focus on big problems to solve. Like I was focused initially on social commerce. It's like it's a fun, cool thing, but it wasn't like a huge problem. Like
Yeah.
health insurance, you totally went after like the equivalent of like the broken toilet. It's like, God, this
Yeah.
sucks. I need a solution, you know?
It is
So
America's broken toilet. That's actually a
yeah.
very apt metaphor.
Whereas like, social commerce is like, well, here's a new sponge that washes your dishes a little bit better. It's like, whatever. So that would be a big focus for me. And then I think the other thing would be I would be careful. I think I would be more careful, and this wasn't because of Google. It might just be reflection on my startup days
Mhm.
about capital
Mhm.
and being careful not to equate dollars raised with success.
Yes.
And like for the when we did the pivot from Yably to Poachable, renamed Anthology, the recruiting thing, which was inspired by Reveal, by the way. The
I remember a little bit.
right? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I remember
I remember looking at that and going, damn it, he's right.
because I remember you were like, "Hey, what do you think about this?" I was like, "Oh, that's a really cool idea," and I thought, "Well, maybe we apply it to recruiting."
Yeah,
Um,
that's funny.
but I think that in that case, we were so eager to kind of keep moving up funding rounds that
Yeah.
we were so focused. Well, then in order to do that, we're going to have to demonstrate 10x growth. And in order to get that 10x growth, we ended up doing unnatural things that weren't probably the right thing for the business. And we
Mhm.
took a lot of risks that we didn't need to take. And our bets didn't pan out for us. And had we sort of maybe taken a more organic growth approach, we might have changed the outcome. But hindsight's 2020. So yeah, to answer your question, I would definitely going back. I think I would mainly bring a little bit more calmness and centeredness as a founder,
Mm.
because I felt like I was a frenzied founder in 2009 or whenever the hell we were. It's all a blur now, but
I love that you
yeah.
use that word. I'm working on that now. I'm working on calmness and reflection. I Thesis gone through plenty of ups and downs from, building something we thought was working great, and then the federal law changed and we couldn't do that
Mm,
anymore. But the truth is when you're a founder, you have like two things you might say in a year that you're like, that was good, actually. That was me on my best behavior saying something smart. And I remember I talked to my team after some of that went down. And I said, we've got a lot of work to do to get back to where it feels like we're on our feet. And I think
mm,
between now and then, our product is clarity. Our product is not a health
mm.
plan. Our product is not a list of feature requirements. Our product is clarity to be delivered both to ourselves and to the broader team. And I think calmness is such a big part of that. So I'm still working on that now.
Yeah, well, it's hard because you naturally feel like, well, if I'm not thinking about this 24/7, I'm somehow like slacking. But I think the reality is like even a professional sports player, they need to rest. They need to unplug to bring their A game when it matters. And if you're
Yeah,
constantly, right?
yeah.
So,
Yes, and B, ego is just all up in the mix on everything with being an
yeah.
early stage founder. I'm thinking about a class that I took at Harvard Business School called Rich versus King. It was a Noam Wasserman class. I don't know if you ever took
Oh,
that
no,
class.
I didn't take that one. What was it
So
about?
I'm going to tattle on myself. First of all, I thought that I understood startups because I wanted to build a startup and I had read a lot about startups. That's the only class at HBS that I got a 3 in, which is the worst grade you can get at business school, because I was cocky, raised my hand, saying some shit that I didn't know what I was talking about. I'm a smart guy, he could tell, and I got a 3, and I deserved the 3, probably a 4. But the thing that was cool about that class, he had built a class around a book, which is great work if you can get it. He's already written the book, and it's about rich versus king. And the idea is often founders have a motivation to get really wealthy, or founders have a motivation to have a lot of control. Usually there's some element of both, but he had actually done a bunch of meaningful longitudinal analysis and figured out that if you took the behaviors that a founder would take who wanted to be rich, you were much more likely to achieve that outcome. Whereas if you took the behaviors of a founder who wanted to be king, such as not giving up equity, not hiring people that are better than you, you're probably going to eat shit. And I remember that was a big, big learning for me, because a lot of what we're talking about, bringing it back to your point, being able to surround yourself by people and compensate those people who are better than you at things, being able to bring somebody in. I got somebody on my team now who, if I completely eat shit, the board may look at this person and go, hey, that person seems pretty good. Maybe that person should be the CEO of Decent. And I think the combination of getting older and a little bit less afraid and a little bit more confident in my own skin, but also just going, shit, I know this isn't going to work if I'm the smartest guy. So, what is my other option? It will create better outcomes, but it can create some imposter syndrome as well.
Yeah, indeed. It reminds me of, I was in a meeting the other day and one of my peers said, also like super accomplished, but really humble guy. And he was like, I'm not the smartest guy around, but one thing I know I can do is I can build teams of people that are smarter than me and keep them happy and empower them to do great things. And I think it's just such a multiplier effect, right? Like it's really where you want to get to. And for some reason,
that's why you're at Google, right, Tom? I mean, if we're being honest with each other, that's got to be among your top 3 skills?
I think I'm pretty good at it. Yeah, you're always learning, but for sure, it's interesting with career options. I think, frankly, the real reason I'm able to be back at Google. Well, funny thing is, I was choosing between, after my startup kind of time was done, and I was like, I need to basically pay the bills again.
Yep.
I had an option to go to Amazon, our favorite company, which we started the conversation with, or Google. And I was like, I think part of the reason I had an opportunity to go back to Google was like I had left in good standing, and it's all about relationships, right?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, that's one thing that it goes beyond product, and maybe even beyond tech, but it's a small world, right? And you never know it, but your paths will cross with people that you've worked with or for, or who work for you. And like, that's where karma and just always trying to do the right thing and do right by people, I feel like is just a good principle for life in general, right? Like it helps everybody.
I agree with that lesson. And I think there's no better example of that than today. I was once sort of an early stage startup founder here with you. And today I'm here on your Fireside PM podcast. and we've come a long way.
I know. Who knows? Next time we'll have some Web3 thing together.
Text me if you want to talk about that.
But tell me a little bit about what your view is running product. So you've done it at a consumer startup, which was the dating venture, and then you've done it at established kind of. Gusto was a B2B, which I was a customer of. I think you referred me.
Gusto's a good product. Yeah,
good. That it solved the problems. Like, I don't want to deal with this. Like, these people will deal with it. Great. So yeah, I still remember that. And now you're working on. Is it a health plan, or is it something? It's insurance related, right?
It's health insurance. Yeah. It's health insurance, and it's very similar to what you said about Gusto. I want you to be saying about Decent,
right?
In a few years if you ever start or run a mid-sized company again.
Yeah. So tell me, like, do you think what it takes to make good product decisions differs by the type of product, or do you think, or are you of the school like, hey, there's common principles they apply, whether it's B2C, B2B, or enterprise or whatever?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I'm glad you named all three of those. I'm going to say something that's extremely controversial and almost no one will agree. I think B2B is easy mode of product development. Here's why I think that. It's because people have to pay you, but it's because it's typically people that are going to make a decision based in part on their budgeting needs and not just on the basis of some incredible salesperson's relationship with them. So let's compare that to consumer and enterprise. In the consumer world, you could go through 50 different incarnations of just a lightweight social app. I'll use that as an example because I ran one. And you can talk yourself into, oh, I think people like this. Why do they think they like it? Well, some of them are signing up for it. Well, do they churn out? Yeah, most of them do, but some of them are really enjoying it. You're not asking anybody to take out their wallet. You don't have any forcing functions to figure out, is this meaningful? And actually, I'm going to take it back because you told me you like stories, to when I was an English major at Stanford. The problem with being an English major at Stanford, and the reason, Tom, the true reason that I became an entrepreneur is this. I went to Stanford. I got there in 1998. It was the era of rampant grade inflation at Stanford. It was very, very, very hard not to get A's or B's at Stanford, especially when you're an English major. So I'm an English major and I'm taking these classes. And I wanted to be a good writer. I still want to be a good writer. And I would share my writing, and I knew it wasn't great. And my classmates would say, oh yeah, this is very good. And I'd say, do you have any feedback for me? And they'd say, I liked it. And I'd say, do you have any negative feedback? And they'd say, I don't like the name of that character. And I would say, oh my God, I'm writing this stuff. Yeah, grandpa who fought behind enemy lines in World War II with a bomb strapped to his code-breaking cell that was buried in German ground so that he could blow himself and the equipment up if he was captured. I prefer to have like a little bit more intense feedback in my life. And I don't think that this is real. I don't think we're living in reality. If we're like, oh, everything's great, it's great. It drove me crazy at Stanford. And I couldn't get good feedback in my writing. So I wasn't improving as much as I wanted to. And ultimately, I realized that if I started a company and got into entrepreneurship, the market would tell me when I suck. And I think there's so much to like about that. But taking that back to your question about consumer, B2B, enterprise, in consumer, you're writing stories. That's what you're doing. Market's not going to tell you. You can trick yourself into, oh, look, people are signing up. Oh, I found a growth hack that, got me 50,000 users a day. I did that. It was awesome. I was pretty sure that we'd change the world. We hadn't. Nobody was going to take out their wallet. I was never going to build a great company out of that. And then when Facebook came and, for their reasons, decided they didn't like how we were using that and not paying them for ads, I was screwed because we hadn't built something people wanted enough to pay for it. On the enterprise side, I haven't worked in that space, so I probably can't talk too much trash. And there is definitely big dollars being exchanged. But my sense is that it can be very relationship driven. For B2B, for me, I can get enough people on the phone and say, will you pay me $325 a month for this? And they'll either say yes or hell no. And here's why. Then I can actually get the feedback I need to get better.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's, it seems like the consumer angle is a little bit of a crapshoot. Like you get it and it's a massive outcome, but, it's really hard to figure out, well, why was this consumer startup successful and this other one that looked very similar, like not, 1/100th of the success. Whereas the B2B, even when we went from Yably to Poachable, and it was very rewarding to kind of talk to a recruiter and have her say like, look, here's my problem. I need better leads. If you can give me better leads, like I will pay you money for it.
And then I will pay you this much, and it's because you'll be displacing this other product.
Yeah,
which you can then take notes of. I miss consumer, honestly, because I do think the consumer English major analogy is good. Put what you want out in the world, and maybe people will love it, and you'll be a multi-billionaire, and that sounds great. But I remember when I went through Techstars, there's these two dudes, Gilad and Shlomi, who are from Israel. We're still friends with these guys, and they had started what ultimately became like a paid service that everybody else in Techstars was like, yeah, maybe we can do this with the Facebook API. Hey, maybe we can do this and we'll do something with Internet of Things. And maybe someday someone will pay for it or something about ads. And these guys are like, what are you jokers doing? They're very pragmatic. and they'd always say the same thing to me. They're like, Nick, we don't understand your business, but we think you're very courageous. And I thought that was a compliment, Tom. I spent about 4 years thinking, these Israeli guys think I'm courageous. They thought I was an idiot because there was no way to figure out if I was going to be among the 99.9% consumer startup graveyard or maybe get real lucky.
Yeah. I think the combo of we don't understand your business, but we think you're courageous. Like if you take each of them separately, they're like, whatever. But when you put them together, it's like, we really don't know what you're doing, but hey, good luck to you, buddy.
And neither do you, we think. But good luck anyway. You seem nice enough.
Oh my goodness. All right. So maybe just a couple more questions before we wrap up, Nick.
Sure. Tell
me about the best product or one of the best product hires you've made and how that impacted like the business. And maybe you should exclude...
I'm gonna tell a story of failure from before Decent.
Okay, yeah.
And I'll do it probably without sharing this person's name because we're still friends, and I don't know if he'd want to be put on blast. But I think what happens when you are in the really early stage, and I'm thankful that Decent is mostly out of this, but my previous company was not, is especially if you're a pretty good storyteller and maybe you showed a little traction by doing some things that were unsustainable, like I did, you can get a little over your skis. You can get people going, hey, like, we kind of thought you got this because you went and told us all the good things. You didn't necessarily tell us all these bad things. And we were at a point where we were growing really quickly. And I was like, people aren't sticking around enough. And again, I guess connected back to the understanding the business, I knew at that time that I had gone on hard mode for Reveal Chat because you needed to be synchronously connected with someone who was relevant to you, which creates a host of issues that are much more difficult to solve. I realized we weren't going to do it. And even if Facebook had left that, hose on for a while, the core service wasn't valuable enough. And I remember hiring a gentleman who came in and he said, how are you going to measure your success as a product? And it was a weird question for me because I was used to thinking about that in terms of business, but how are you going to measure success in terms of product? And I threw some bullshit. I was like, yeah, people getting connections. And he's like, okay, which people? What's a connection? Oh, duh, you look on Amplitude, it'll show you right there. But he was like, no, what are you really trying to do with this thing? And I said, under duress, I'm trying to create more meaningful connections between people in the world. And he said, well, do you think that's what's happening on most of these conversations? And I said, fuck, no, I don't. Because I know our data. And if that was happening, I wouldn't be seeing two things. I wouldn't be seeing people churn out to the same degree. And I wouldn't get on my own product, Tom. I don't think I've ever told this story before. I got on my own product and a probably 16-year-old British kid who had snuck in under the sensors sent me a dick pic on my own product while I'm on there trying to figure out, like, how can we make this useful for people? And I realized the use case he was looking for was a way to show his privates to a bunch of people. And I was like, this is not the product that I want to build. And that was part of bringing this gentleman in. And he said, okay, how are we going to measure this? And he basically, pushed me enough until I was like, I guess I would want to see people coming back and talking to the same person again and again, n number of times. And he constructed these funnels to show me, I'm not going to say that had never happened, but it was sort of like a sun shining on a dog's.
Right.
He said, until you can really start to see an instrument, a curve, making that go up, we shouldn't be talking about anything else. He's like, you talk when you go out and raise money for this product about curing loneliness. And I think for you, Nick, that's real, whether or not that's possible for you. But you're not going to know if it's possible until you set a definition of what it means and start measuring against that definition. And the simplicity he brought to that conversation where he was going, I don't want to hear your ideas about should we launch on Android. I don't want to hear your stupid ass ideas about should we give conversation prompts. What are you measuring and why can't I see a dashboard that shows you that that's not happening? It was very painful, but I realized that if you don't know where you're going, any road's going to take you there. And the goal of a really good product person often is just to define what success looks like and then help you see if you're hitting it.
I love it. It reminds me of actually some advice I was looking at recently that was written years ago about setting good OKRs. And one of the things that was written was, if you're able to set your OKRs in a few minutes, you have not thought hard enough. Like,
Yeah.
agreeing cross-functionally on the right set of goals and how to measure them really specifically should be a hard process. It should be really painful to get it right. And if you just kind of scribble some stuff down and be like, well, yeah, usage and mouse and whatever,
Yeah.
like
Yeah. Yeah.
that's,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's
Shit,
probably
shit
not it.
Facebook. No, totally. You know, it's
Yeah.
funny. Talking about degree of difficulty. I'm thankful to have a wife that allows me to play this game, and she supports it. I'm sure that there's many days when she'd be like, "Dude, just give it all up and go work at Salesforce, Nick. Come on,
Get some snacks.
yeah, get some snacks, get some money for our children's college fund." No, the thing that I like blanked. Oh yeah, won't name names. The most successful entrepreneur that I know, who
Mm,
happens to be somebody that I went to school with, and I'll leave it at that. Had to talk to him in 5 years, and I got him on the phone. And I'm not particularly good at small talk,
mm,
but I thought I should at least start by acknowledging his meteoric rise
mm.
over the last 5 years in a way that was authentic. So I tried to do that in a not corny way. And he just looked at me and he said, "Dude, we can do all that, but like, you and I both know this shit is so hard. It is so hard." And I looked at him and I realized that was the interaction we were going to have, and I welcomed it because it was like, it was real. And he
Yeah.
wasn't interested in talking about his accolades and all this stuff. He was just like, how I could be, welcome in that conversation was certainly not by kissing his ass about his success, but being someone in the arena that can look at him and go, yes, this is super, super difficult. So to the point about um, building, doing a good job with product, I actually think there's a trace of sort of ego on one side and masochism on the other that a lot of the repeat founders that I've met, and I certainly have, that makes you stick it out. And maybe it's because you think you're so special and ultimately you will change the world. Maybe it's because you believe something that Rainer Maria Rilke said, which is the purpose of life is to be defeated by greater and greater things. I really like that poem. But you can find some meaning in it, but only if you just accept that you're just going to spend most days eating shit. And to me, that's actually okay.
Amen. I mean, I admire your courage.
And yet, Tom, to take that full circle, if I take 10 minutes with you, you would actually understand my business. So I'm just as stupid, but I'm working in a better space.
I love it. I love it. We do have one final question from someone in the live stream, Wes Wu. Any recommendations for translating or repackaging startup speed and energy to larger orgs? Feels like we are drowning ourselves in OKRs and VP reviews sometimes. Do you maybe you can think about your Amazon days, and because that's a famous company for being big but gets stuff done, right? Like
Yeah.
they move.
Yeah. I can only see two options, and both of them are fraught with danger, Wes. I think this is skill and charybdis of corporate resource management. The first option is to convince people that they should work at one of the largest companies in the world that hypothetically could have some of the most resources in the world, and come up with a really nice way of letting them know that those resources are not actually for them, or those resources are for the customer. So that's actually one really good option, is to tell a story around your company, so that the people who could get a job anywhere will come work for you, use a literal door as a desk, and love it because they've bought in that greatly to the story that the company is telling. And then the second one is to hire founders who are not psychopaths, and let them inject enthusiasm into your culture. But that who are not psychopaths is doing a lot of work, because there's just a lot of psychopathic founders. And the best way that I've found to filter is you just go talk to people that they've worked with, and then talk to more people that they've worked with, and then finally tell someone that will tell you the truth. I'm not saying that these are the right two options, but I think those are two of the options that you have.
Yeah, and I'll throw in my thoughts. I used to try. Actually, you asked me, Nick, about coming back to big tech, and there was a point where I would often say, "Oh, we need this team. We need to act more like an early stage startup, and we should do things differently. And then I think over the years I realized like time out, like the risk and reward equation is very different between a startup and established company. And it's sort of like, oh, well, why don't we drive this 18-wheeler like a motorcycle? Well, we are carrying a load of stuff and we can't just like swerve around. And if we crash, like people will know if that motorcycle crashes, nobody's going to even miss them.
Yeah. Their mom
So
calls to see if they're okay. We both had that experience.
so it's like, yes, you have a lot of OKRs and VP reviews and you're drowning in them, but I think they are meant to mitigate risk, and the math of it does actually justify that. Obviously, there's an extreme in both cases, but I would encourage people who are working in larger orgs to try and adapt some of the startup mentality, but it will never be as agile as the smaller startup. The same way that, the late stage startup can't do it the same way they did it in their early days. I mean, I'll just say it. Like, you could argue that Facebook, the whole break things and just go fast and don't care, like that has implications. And you end up
Yeah.
doing things that may not be in the best interest of the customers or the shareholders in the long run.
I'm with you, and I found a fourth answer that I think I want to add to the set, and it's the one that feels best and cleanest to me. So, Wes, I don't know what you do. I apologize if I should know what you do, but I don't know what you do. And the other thing you can do is find a job at a company that has a mission that is so personally meaningful that when you are going through that OKR review, you can stomach it because it's in service of affordable healthcare for all. You can stomach it because it's in service of getting people to space. It's decent does not have a monopoly on this, but that is honestly the best advice I can give you, is that passion is a force multiplier. And some of the things that feel so ridiculous are actually symptomatic of you not caring about the problem that your company is trying to solve. And the truth, and nobody wants to say this part out loud, is that for most companies, it's really hard to care. It's really hard to care. So I think the single best advice that I can give is make sure you're working at a company, and you may be, where the bar that I've given my kids, because I'm now telling, my 5-year-old who are going, Daddy's job is cool because he gets to be the boss. And I just cry myself to sleep when I hear that. When I tell them, hey, the truth is, I don't want to see you start companies unless when you care so much about the problem that you really think about it at some level of depth, it can actually make you cry. If you can get there, then some of the medicine you have to take will go down with sugar because you care about where you're trying to get.
Amen, Nick. You're one of the most soulful guests we've had on the show so far. And I appreciate
that. Sounds a lot like you're courageous, and I love it. Thank you.
I do understand your business a little bit, though. So that's good. Well, Nick, thank you so much for coming on, man, and giving us your time. I know you're a busy guy and this is still a fledgling podcast, but it was so fun catching up. It reminds me, I miss our coffees, man. We'll have to
meet somewhere in the middle that's not on fire, Tom. And I would love that. Thank you for having me.
We'll do our best. Take care, buddy.
Bye-bye.
Bye.